Hello, it's Laurie or BlockchainBrad, and today I'm speaking with a good friend. His name is Sam Williams. He is the CEO of Arweave, and he's here to provide you with an update on all that Arweave is doing. Sam, thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Brad. Great to be back.
Likewise, mate. Now, you're busy, you're in New York, you're in a hotel, you're always traveling, you're always doing something, you never stop. Mate, how is everything going? Let's start from the basics, though. Many people don't know about Arweave. What would you like to say to those people firstly, so we can really get the ball rolling on the update?
Easy. So Arweave is a permanent information storage system. It's kind of like a blockchain, but we've scaled it so that you can put very large amounts of data inside it. And that has lots of useful, use cases for all sorts of things, from contract storage to storage of like personal memories and these kinds of things. It's really applicable in a very large number of cases.
Right, and Sam, you make it sound so easy. We both know it's not. It's been a long-term project. It's been a long time coming to get this far. Now, permanent storage, you're one of the world leaders in this industry, in this vertical, and in this decentralized frame. Talk to us about what that means.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually think that the permanent storage wasn't a serious thing that you could do in a centralized environment. In fact, it's one of those cases where it's necessary to have a decentralized environment in order to have a minimum viable permanent storage system. And then the reason for that is pretty simple. It's like, well, if you have a centralized system, you always have a centralized point of failure. And so if you want to store a piece of data for an extremely long period of time, you just can't have that central point of failure. So we can think about things like the Library of Alexandria, for example, is a perfect sort of of this, where you have all of this valuable knowledge in one place, and then suddenly there's a fire or a flood, and all of that data is gone, or information at that time was written on paper and scrolls and things. But the principle still holds today.
Exactly. And what's interesting also is that there's always going to be a use case. There's always going to be those who want to participate in technology like yours. You're in New York now. We could even hear the sirens in the background to prove it. Now, in that respect, Sam, talk to us about what you're doing as you travel, and what's the purpose of it? Who are you talking with to really showcase and discuss the potential of this kind of permanent data storage solution to help enterprise, for example?
Yeah. So this particular one, I'm here to attend a game theory and mechanism design conference set. We're looking for researchers to join our team to help us build out the cryptographic incentives of the network and improve them in the future. Right.
Okay. So you're at conferences that do real things. How has the other side of the conference discussion been? You've seen those who tend to do more of the superficial partnerships. We've seen the confluence of all kinds of things happening in crypto. What's your take on those aspects as you've seen them firsthand, no doubt?
Yeah. Well, I think the situation is improving, certainly. There are certainly fewer conferences nowadays that are just full of,
BS.
I wouldn't put it quite like that, but I think there's definitely a lot more substance going around nowadays, which is great.
Yeah, and we met, this was some years ago, you were at Consensus at that time, and even then, it was very difficult to find those projects that had real substance, had a longitudinal plan beyond the shill factor, essentially. So clearly you want to be in that, you are building something for the long term. How is everything going though, Sam, in that respect, in terms of the tech developments?
It's great. So tech-wise, we built and launched the system a year ago now. So the tech has been very solid for a while, but we're really focusing now on adoption. And the last few months have been really incredible for that. So last month, for example, the amount of data uploaded by the community was up 110% month on month. And the number of community transactions, so the transactions submitted to the network, was also up 72% here, according to my notes. In a single month, which is really pretty phenomenal. And the growth pattern has been like that for a few months solid now.
Yeah, and I have noticed on Twitter also, there's been more engagement from miners, more engagement in hackathons. A lot of that development is happening, and a lot of that buzz is happening sort of at the grassroots. So in a global frame, where are the regions where you notice that Arweave is getting a lot of buzz?
I would say mostly in the US and Europe is the area that we see it. But we really try and keep things as global as possible. We try to avoid this idea of, we're a Western-facing project or an Asian-facing project. we really try and make it. I think the reason the web was so great, is so great, is because it allows us to speak to people from all over the world simultaneously and to bring them into the project, regardless of geographic barriers. So we really do try and take a global approach, which is actually why, in terms of hackathons, we've been focusing more recently on online hackathons than in person. So we have tried out some in-person ones, and they're really good for building very strong bonds. But you have this major selective factor to it, which is, okay, in order to have a successful in-person hackathon, you have to have all the hackers in one place, in one building, in one city, in one time zone. It really cuts down the number of people you can talk to. So instead, we've, as well as doing those on like the large scale where we can find enough hackers to get together in one place to make it worthwhile. We've been doing these online hackathons where people gather on our Discord server and they chat to one another in the same kind of way that you would in an in-person hackathon. But of course, it's all online. It's all kind of asynchronous, so anyone can come and go depending on their time zone. And globally distributed. There are people from India, people from America, people from Brazil, people from Nigeria, Europe, really everywhere.
And Sam, that really fits with the whole narrative or the whole premise for blockchain DLT and all that is about that transparency, because it's also about being borderless, breaking down those barriers that we've seen, those silos. And one of them is communication, one of them is information. And you're enabling this through that online approach to really literally go global with awareness. So essentially it's a successful campaign to bring Arweave to the fore. Now, what about the core features though? We've talked about these before. You're very clear and confident that you've already built the fundamentals, but with regard to the BlockWeave, for example, with Wildfire, how is everything progressing in the development of your core tech?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I'm here actually is to help us find developers, or not developers, but researchers in this case, to build out a sort of layer that we created, or has at least occurred naturally on top of Wildfire, which is the data distribution layer in the network. So just to briefly explain this for people that haven't seen us talk about it.
Sure. Sorry about that.
No, of course. It's very, very simple. It's if you and I are nodes in the network and we have a desire to share data, or we have a desire to have each other's data, really, then we play by a simple set of rules, which is if you give me data, I'm going to give you data. And I'm going to give you data occasionally anyway, just to see what's going to happen. And this is an abstraction of what was called in BitTorrent optimistic tit for tat. And the consequence of this is that everybody in practice shares data with everyone else all the time, because that small amount of optimism sort of creates this what's called a Nash equilibrium, where just everybody is incentivized to share data whenever they can. Right. And at one point, this same kind of algorithm was responsible for sharing, I think, a third of the internet's traffic, 30% of the internet's traffic at one point, which is really incredible as an incentive mechanism. I think it's actually probably the most the most successful decentralized incentive mechanism used in practice. So anyway, we have a kind of abstraction on top of this that takes the same sort of principles and also says, okay, well, let's distribute transactions and blocks in the system in the same way. And of course, as a miner, you want to have access to those transactions and blocks as soon as possible. And the only way to do that is to share data with me when I ask for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's pragmatics really built into this right from the outset.
Yeah. It's a very, we try and keep all of the mechanism design, so the incentive mechanism that's in the system, as simple as possible. But one of the things that's interesting and arises from this Wildfire mechanism is the fact that the scoring and the ranking of other nodes is not performed at a network consensus level, which makes it extremely scalable, because it means that none of the nodes have to discuss with each other what the reputation of other nodes in the network should be. So that's a real asset.
A huge point, Sam, because it frees up the whole ecosystem to function, scale, do everything it needs to be a global network. Otherwise, it would be stifled, no doubt. So that's a core feature.
Absolutely. And it also allows for something else that's very, very interesting, which is that nodes in the network aren't, the mechanism that they use to rank each other is not enforced. And that means that they can actually choose however they want to rank each other. And as a consequence of this, there's this sort of meta game that plays, which is the games that people use to rank each other are themselves ranked by other partners in the network as a consequence of this, you have a sort of natural adaptive mechanism which leads to pro-social behavior. So for an example of this in practice, make it less sort of abstract, is we recently launched an IPFS incentivization layer. So what this means is that IPFS is another kind of, it's really a distributed content delivery network. Yeah, we can put Arweave's permanent storage incentives underneath IPFS now. And the way that we do this is just if you're running an Arweave node, you can optionally run an IPFS node next to it. And if you do so, then when a special transaction comes to the network, it says, oh, okay, this is an Arweave transaction, it gets mined into a block. But then also those nodes that want to, yeah, they can expose it on an IPFS node on the same machine. And it creates a kind of bridging system.
Right. And Sam, given that IPFS is such a broad and it has such significant scope, it's a well-known system that's already employed now internationally. What does it mean to have this integration, to have Arweave compatible with IPFS?
Well, it's enormous. There's a huge amount of data out there already on IPFS. And now if you just use a very simple application to submit the hashes, yeah, you can make that data stay around in IPFS indefinitely, which is really, yeah, it's quite a step up.
So it's a big deal. You often understate, and maybe that's an English thing or an Aussie thing. We do it too. But Sam, let's talk about the developers, because one of the things that's really always stood out is the capacity and the interest from the developer side to use Arweave. The proof is in the mining now and the uptake. But you know, how is the uptake going from your knowledge with regard to development, with regard to utilizing Arweave?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were just a few, like a handful of community-made applications just 3 or 4 months ago at this point. And now, you know, we're up to around 50, I think. Like every single day, there's a new interesting application. I think today we were looking at someone that made a sort of family tree storage system. So you can, yeah, store your family tree in a kind of data storage mechanism that will preserve it for, you know, tens or hundreds of years. Yeah, every day there's something new and interesting going on in the developer community.
And it seems it's spreading quite rapidly as well. Now, with regard to the really interesting potential of this, and that's the enterprise side, are you having discussions with any party right now to really bolster the value of this in that sector and in business verticals?
Yeah, I mean, we talk to businesses all the time that would like to use the system. For example, we have a very interesting conversation recently with the auditors of TrueUSD, who, yeah, they use our system already in order to store their attestation documents. So the idea is here, you know, they want trust, essentially. I mean, it's literally in the name. It's called trust token.
Right.
And one way of doing that is, yeah, making sure that the way that they store their data is has integrity, I guess. So if you have the link for the attestation documents that say, you know, there is a one-to-one backing between TrueUSD and actual US dollars, as long as you have this Arweave link, you can always come back to it. It can never be modified. You can see when it was submitted. It has a verifiable timestamp, and you can see who submitted it. Yeah, so we're working now with TrueUSD's auditors to see if we can integrate with their new sort of live dashboard system and essentially get live feeds of what the bank account balance is and how many of the tokens there are inside the Ethereum network, and then store these on.
Right, and in that sort of crypto frame, obviously the potential is significant. But outside that as well, Sam, we've talked about things like the potentials of archive data, different verticals. There's so many that would benefit from having their data stored in a permanent, trustable, decentralized fashion that is through your network. So can you tell us a bit more about the kinds of verticals you either envisage or that you know right now will adopt this technology?
I mean, there are so many. Like, we've been talking to architects recently, for example. There's a very large use case in the architectural sector. Turns out that, you know, you have to store these plans for buildings for 40 or 50 years. And if you fail to do so, there are major legal penalties. But of course, a single centralized company storing a piece of data for 40 or 50 years is an almost impossible ask. There's no real way that you can appropriately plan for that period of time for data storage. I mean, if you think back 50 years ago, the average hard drive was, you know, like 600 kilobytes.
Right.
It's a very different thing, and the number of hard drives you'll have gone through in the middle. There's just too many for you to really say that a small architecture shop can honestly do this properly. So it's exactly the kind of thing where a system like Arweave is perfect.
And Sam, one of the big assets is perhaps the incentivization that's afforded by having a tokenized economy like the one that you're building. Now, in that context, what are the real benefits? You know, can you discuss more about mining, for example, and the way in which people can be rewarded by interacting with your ecosystem and being participants in it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the ecosystem is really a two-sided market, right? There's miners who provide storage, and they can provide storage for short periods of time or long periods of time. They're not tied in. And there are users that come along and they provide the funding for those miners. And the way the system essentially works is you say, okay, I'd like to store a megabyte of data. I put 200 or 300 years worth of funding up front into what's called a pool. And then this pool is distributed to miners appropriate over that time period. But of course, if you put 300 years worth of storage funding in today, at today's storage prices, that actually turns into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years worth of storage as the price of storage decreases.
Right.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about the Arweave system is that you couldn't possibly adjudicate this kind of economic network with a centralized authority. What's really interesting here is that this is a pure and serious use case of, actual decentralized consensus networks.
Right. And with regard to security, how important is it to have that mining aspect built in to assert a degree of security for your network?
Oh, it's everything. I mean, without the miners, there would be nowhere to store the data.
Right.
And the way that the incentive mechanisms in the network work is that it incentivizes miners to store as many copies of the data as they can. It's not just, we say, please make sure there are 10 copies of this in the network. And so that means that if you put a piece of data into the network today, you get something like, it varies depending on the number of miners, like 500 to 700 copies of that piece of data, which really is the most effective backup system in existence anywhere in the centralized or decentralized markets. We simply can't buy this kind of data storage anywhere else.
Right. Now, Sam, one of the things that's a tough question, and it's not something you ever like talking about, but we always need to, and that is with regard to the token itself. Obviously, it's the embodiment of your utility. Fundamentally, it is what drives the attention. It's what also is what enabling miners to mine. So in this respect, what is the plan to your knowledge with regard to the future, for more access, for greater numbers of participation, for greater numbers of users? More specifically, obviously the exchanges decide, but at what point do we see the emergence of Arweave when we start to see this become globally accessible via exchanges?
Of course, yeah. I mean, the first thing to note is that the token is at the center of everything we do. This is the core of the network. It doesn't work without this. None of the incentive mechanisms I was speaking about previously function without the token. And nor would they function very well if we didn't have serious relationships with serious exchanges, which is what we've been building for over a year now.
Sam, we have to stop you there. We're friends. Yeah. Serious, you're serious, I'm serious. You practically wear an invisible tie everywhere you go. And when you say serious exchanges, I know you mean that. And we don't want to FOMO. Like, we just don't want to do that. You have a legitimate cause here and a legitimate company you're building. And essentially, it's really designed to be something you've always said, that eventually you want to be able to relax in years to come and let this flourish as a decentralized, successful system. But right now, you're still building this. Exchanges are fundamental. And like you said, you're talking to some serious people in those exchanges. What more can you tell us, though, with regard to, the discussions at the very least? Because obviously they decide. It's up to them. Everything rests with when they decide to list you. But clearly, you would be someone who would support that.
Oh, of course. Like, from the beginning, we've been in that position. From our point of view, when I say serious, I mean exchanges that are legitimate in the way that they operate, which is actually unfortunately fairly rare in our industry.
Can you talk to us a bit more about that, Sam, though? Because it's interesting that, both you and I agree there's BS in this space, but there's also legitimate actors as well, and exchanges are no different. How do you discern and decide what constitutes something that's legitimate in that in that area of exchanges?
Well, one thing that we're fairly fortunate about as an industry, I think, is that there's quite a few people working on transparency initiatives in order to bring greater transparency to the exchange space, which, until I was a founder, until I spent a lot of time, in this space talking to exchanges myself, and also working with other founders that have had experiences listing in various different locations. I hadn't really considered how deep the problem was.
Right.
We are very fortunate. There are a lot of people putting a lot of work into sort of statistical analysis, for example, to work out how much of trading is wash trading, how much is simply volume that doesn't exist, and so on. These sorts of things. Like the blockchain currencies is a really great example of this.
So you want to be part of. You want to make sure that the token that is Arweave is also endorsed and supported by equally legitimate entities, whether that be exchanges or other, and that's very respectable, and I commend you for that. But with regard to the overall system we see now, we see wash trading rife in different regions. We see questionable volume. How do you ever get away from that convolution when we see it so prevalent?
Well, I mean, you just have to choose the partners that you work with. I mean, the key thing for us is twofold. We don't want to list first on exchanges where there's large amounts of wash trading or fake volume or anything like this that can be used essentially to mislead the people trading our token.
Right.
That's not an acceptable situation. The second thing is that the security of the exchange must be serious in the way that it's implemented. I have founders, friends of mine that are founders that have listed on exchanges that have then been hacked. And then, of course, it doesn't matter how much you tell people, please don't store your tokens in exchanges. People are going to do it anyway because it's just ease of use.
Because it's hackable as well, Sam. Now, one of the privileges, I suppose, of being a CEO or being a co-founder of something like Arweave is you speak to many other different projects, some that have already been through this process. So has it been valuable to have these insights, to have these conversations and advice from other parties who've been through this?
Of course, all the time. Every day I speak to other founders in similar positions.
Right. So Sam, what can we expect? With regard to, you say serious, obviously top tier is in your agenda. We're going to see, do you think, to your knowledge at the very least, something that will translate into a token that will be accessible on exchange this year sometime?
Yes, absolutely. That's my expectation.
Right.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, with partnerships, I did want to ask you that as well. Are there any other partnerships that you're able to disclose that are going to consolidate, strengthen the development of Arweave? As you move more into this decentralized data frame, decentralized storage especially, are there any other perhaps centralized parties that are making the switch?
Mm-hmm. I mean, not a centralized party in this case, but we actually just finished working with Monero to audit the RandomX proof of work algorithm. We worked pretty closely with them to essentially commission audits and make sure that this proof of work algorithm is legitimate. And the proof of work algorithm itself, RandomX, is ASIC resistant, is the idea, which strengthens our mining community. The idea being that we keep it open and more accessible for smaller players for longer, who are more likely to keep more copies of the data. And this hard fork went into effect on Monday and was successful. So that was really great.
Yes, I did read that. It was published on Twitter. So you must be excited, though, overall, Sam. Since we first spoke, you've moved into the sort of actionable and proof of utility phase, not just the theory initially. From the beginnings when you were working through your PhD at that time. Now you've really switched in to lead this out. You must be excited now that you're starting to see proof, empirical proof, that this is starting to unfold as something that is genuinely here for the future, here for the long term, as something that is going to be adopted.
Yes, every day it gets more and more exciting. From our point of view, the utility of Arweave, this permanence of the data storage, which is something you just can't get anywhere else, is so unique. We don't see that we're going to be able to work out what the best first use case is going to be, which is why we go down this approach of helping developers build out all sorts of different tools on top of the system. And we're really starting to see that come into fruition. I mean, we see that now the developers are building yeah, I guess Arweave applications in verticals that we never really imagined that they would. It's really very exciting to see.
Absolutely, and the suite of tools that are being built by external parties that are now sort of adopting all of the things that you started with, that's exciting too, because really it's just expanding the reach and the potential and the technology itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ecosystem itself is decentralizing all the time. It went from the point that there's sort of just a platform where everybody would run the same sort of node software, to now, yeah, the people have built Arweave browsers which run inside your machine, and are also nodes to the network, so they can serve web pages to other people, and pieces of data, contracts, whatever you happen to be storing. Yeah, and also multiple block explorers are cropping up. It's really the ecosystem is sort of rapidly expanding. It's very
absolutely
exciting.
Sam, it's really exciting to be able to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. You're in New York right now, ever traveling. You're always trying to lead out more, teach more, educate, be involved in the developer side, whether it be from the mining, whether that be from the enterprise sector, whether that be fundamentally really just bringing awareness to Arweave. You are literally leading this, and I do thank you for making time to speak with me. If you'd like to know more, make sure you do check out all the social media channels that are available, especially Discord. It's a very active place where certainly Sam does pop in sometimes as well. Don't hesitate to jump in there and interact. But thank you again, Sam. I wish you all the very best as you continue to build out this decentralized data storage solution for the future. And hopefully we can catch up again soon, Sam, to find out that bit more. But certainly I'll be watching to see what does come of more access. I'll be watching to see which exchange, you've made it clear that something's coming. We just don't know when, and we don't know how, and we don't know with which one, but it is coming.
Thanks. Always great to be here.
Likewise. Thanks, Sam.